Hey there, Bixby developers. Jonathan Pan here. Today we're going to be building a capsule which demonstrates dialogue in Bixby. This can be a code along video, so feel free to code along as I build it. And what I'm going to be building is the Walkie Talkie Capsule. So basically you talk to Bixby as if it's on the other side of a walkie-talkie. And you should say some kind of confirmation at the end of your statement, like over or out. Otherwise, Bixby will remind you that you forgot to say over or out. So just FYI, as a disclaimer, I am not a walkie-talkie expert. This capsule is for dialogue demonstration purposes. If any of you guys are walkie-talkie experts, feel free to leave some comments below. Now without further ado, let's go ahead and demo the capsule.
You forgot to say out.
So notice how I did not say hello Bixby, out. Then Bixby will remind me to say out at the end. So hello Bixby, out.
I heard you say hello Bixby, over and out.
So there you can see that Bixby now confirms what it has heard from you because you've said out. And Bixby also ended the conversation by saying over and out. Will you please help me build this capsule?
Don't forget to say over.
Will you please help me build this capsule? Over.
Would you please help me build this capsule? Roger that.
Here you can see Bixby acknowledging what you said, along with tacking on some kind of confirmation at the end that seems to be what I think as proper walkie-talkie lingo. So anyway, let's go ahead and build this capsule, and we're going to actually do this from scratch. So just do create new capsule, and let's name it playground.walkie-talkie. Okay, so right off the bat, you'll notice some of these warnings and stuff, but for now, this doesn't really apply to this capsule. We can deal with that later during cleanup. Let's go ahead and get right into the action by going into the models folder, right-clicking, and creating our model called Walkie Talkie. And it's going to be an action. So first thing, we want to make this a search action. And it's going to take an input from the user. And we can make it optional. And it's also going to take a confirmation from the user. We can also make that optional. And it's going to output an output concept. So now we have to make these three primitive concepts. Let's go ahead, right-click New, Text, and Input. So this is the input text that we collect from the user. Now let's create a confirmation. And this is going to be an enum because there's only a certain amount of valid confirmations that we will accept when talking to this capsule. So now our first symbol, let's make it out. Second symbol, over. Third symbol, we can make it over and out. And we can have some more, like 10.4. Copy that. And let's have Wilco as well because it sounds pretty cool. And finally, how can we forget about Roger? Actually, let's get rid of copy that. We can just make that a synonym to copy. So, okay, cool. Now we have our enum file right there. And for enums like this, we usually want to create a vocabulary file for it. So let's also name this confirmation.vocab.bxb. And it's going to be vocab in parentheses confirmation. And what I like to do is I like to go over to our enum, copy this over to here, hit command bar to line it up, then highlight symbol with this parentheses and just hit Control D, press delete, press command right, press delete, make a quote, and copy this and that. So, okay, that should be correct. Now, in case you didn't catch all the keyboard commands to do that, that's okay. Just make it look something like this. We also want to add a synonym for copy as copy that, and for Roger as Roger that, and for Wilco, will comply, and let's also add a 10.4 for 10.4. Okay, cool. So now we have our enums, and in case you aren't aware of what this vocabulary file does, is that we have a one-to-one relation between our confirmation enum model and this vocabulary file. So anything that we put in here on the right will end up outputting this thing on the left. So that's why, let's say you say 10.4, Bixby's ASR picks it up as 10 space 4. It will return 10-4 as the value specified in the enum from earlier. So hopefully that makes sense. I think it should make more sense once we get to the training portion. Now let's go ahead and make the output concept. So just right click, new model, output. And the template for that is going to be a text as well. Great. So now let's just close all of our tabs. I don't like keeping too many of them open. And we can create an action JavaScript. And let's name this Walkie Talkie.js. It's going to be an extremely simple action. We have to make sure that the input matches the input from the action as well. But basically it's going to take the input and it's going to return it. And when it returns it, it will end up being the output. Now, just if you want just to be a little bit more clear, although very redundant code, this is what's really going on, is that basically we're creating the output here and we're just returning that, as the output. So I'm just going to delete that. But here you can see that this model outputs the output. And since it's just a text, you can make it whatever you want. In this case, we're just going to feed out the input. Cool. Now let's link them together. And to do that, we have to go into the endpoints.bxb file. Let's uncomment this from lines 4 to 7. And we're going to just do Walkie Talkie and walkietalkie.js, and finally input and confirmation. And let's go ahead and delete that, just clean it up a little bit. Okay. Now let's actually do a training to initiate this and see what happens. So let's just do something like hello. And we want this to be the input into the action walkie-talkie. And now the expected behavior here is very simple. Right now, Bixby should just output something like here's what I found and hello.
Here's what I found.
So yeah, right now, obviously you could just see that it outputs the word hello, hello world.
Which one?
And here you can see that it actually takes this as two separate individual words as input. So let's actually fix that. Add hello world to the training. You want to make that an input. So now what we're doing here is we're training Bixby to understand multiple words, in this case 2 words, is just one input instead of 2 words being 2 individual inputs, which is what was going on.
Here's what I found.
So, okay, that's cool. Now let's see what happens if we do 6 of them.
Which one of these 3 inputs?
And same problem. So now we want to train Bixby for many more words. So I just like to use foo bars in this case and just make a bunch of them. It doesn't matter too much. And just highlight them all like this. Set them as the input and walkie-talkie, save, and compile. Okay. So now if we run this,
here's what I found.
You can see that it's taking all that as the input instead of breaking it up into multiple inputs. And if we do a lot of hello worlds,
here's what I found.
It's interpreting that to be the case. So cool. Now we have it behaving as we like with the inputs, but we want to change the here's what I found dialog. Now I think many of you who have done some of my other videos would know how to actually change this dialog, but there's a couple ways to do it, and I'm going to show you the first way, and we're going to want to create this view anyway. So for this, we want this view to match the output concept that gets outputted to us. It's going to be a result view, and it's going to match the output concept. And we can just do it as this. Let's do an empty render block for the sake of demonstration. And here you can see that there's nothing in this render block, and there's also no dialog specified. So if we
Here's what I found.
do that, you'll see now that that's been removed. But what we actually want to do is we want to have a message to the user. So in this case, we're going to be using this syntax to start off with value this. And this syntax here is Bixby's expression language, or basically a way to inject variables into dialog or into strings that you might want to show on your screen. So the syntax is very specific. It is hashtag, curly brackets, and then key. So you have different keys like value, title, raw. We'll be using a couple of them, but for now we're just going to use value. And then this is where you pass in the variable that you want. Up here, when we match the output, I redeclared it as this. To make it maybe a little less confusing, I'll rename it output with the lowercase o. So basically here, this message is saying, okay, I'm going to say your output back at you. So
Hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world, hello.
So what I did just there was I clicked on this little icon, which will mute Bixby. Now, right now, this is all fine and dandy. All it's basically doing is repeating something to us. But that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to behave like a walkie-talkie. Now let's add our confirmation into this. So let's do hello over. Let's basically do these exact same 3 trainings, but with the confirmations now. So here, we're going to do confirmation over. And this hello will be our input. And we're going to do walkie-talkie. Okay, just click compile. So now here we have the confirmation and the input being fed into it. And now make sure that the confirmation matches one of the synonyms within your vocabulary file. In this case, it just matches over, which is directly over. Now let's also add a couple more trainings just to make this a little bit more robust. So let's do a 2-word confirmation along with a 2-word input. So let's try that out. Roger. And this will be the input. And the goal will be walkie-talkie. And a cool little trick you can do, so that way we don't have to type in all those foo bars again. You can click on this little code icon, copy and paste it like that. And just paste it in the add and click add. So now that's mostly what we want, but we also want to add let's see. We also want to add our over and out. So just like that. And click save. Click on the code icon here. You can see that over and out is not selected. Now we can just click and drag over that and set that to be confirmation over and out. Okay, let's save that. Likewise, you could just type that in like what we were doing earlier in order to input that, but I just want to show you that cool trick with copying and pasting the code there. So, okay, now let's try some examples of this. So hello copy. Oh, I muted Bixby. Let's unmute Bixby. Let's take a look at the debugger here by clicking on this little bug icon. Here you can see that it's getting the confirmation as copy and it's getting the input as hello. So let's just test this out a bit before we move any further.
Hello world. Hello world.
And still getting, that's right, copy that as a synonym to copy. If we look at here in our vocab. So that's why that copy was returned, because we referenced the synonym there. So then let's try, this is really exciting and cool.
This is really exciting and cool.
Yes, and here we can see that the confirmation is being saved. In order to stop that from happening, because basically, every utterance is going to be a one-off, we're just going to make everything features transient. So what features transient is that once it reaches the end of an action, it will forget these inputs. And likewise, the output as well, if you want to. But here, we're going to want to do that for both the input and the confirmation. And it won't matter for the output, so that's fine. And I'm just going to close a bunch of these windows real quick and go back to the training. Okay, so now let's try, this is really exciting and cool. Copy that.
This is really exciting and cool.
And this is really exciting and cool. Over and out.
This is really exciting and cool.
Great, so now we're getting the proper confirmations going in and we're getting the proper inputs going in. Now let's hop back to the dialog portion. So we can have the message here in the result view, but for this tutorial, what I want to really demonstrate is using the dialog files. Here in the enus folder, under resources, right-click the dialogs and make a new dialog file. And we want this dialog to match the output. And just like similar to the result view, we're going to want it to match output. And here's a cool little trick to reference various variables within the action. In this case, output is an output. So from the output of the Walkie Talkie action. And this here is what we, obviously our Walkie Talkie action model. And this here is what we're redeclaring it as to reference later. We're going to start with just by directly putting stuff into this template right here. So let's try something like you said value output. And this is going back to that hashtag curly bracket parentheses syntax from earlier. And here you'll be able to see that this will actually change Bixby's behavior and Bixby will start saying you said whatever you said.
You said this is really exciting and cool.
That's correct. I did say that. So how about we also have Bixby reply with the same confirmation that we use to end our statement. And we can do that by actually referencing the confirmation inside the action. So let's actually start by just doing this value action.confirmation. And let's save. And here you can see this big old squiggly warning thing. And there you can see that action.confirmation might be empty. And why is this the case? It's because if we go back to our walkie-talkie model, here you can see that both the input and the confirmation are actually optional. So going back to our output.dialog file, there's a really cool trick with the square brackets. What these brackets mean is that if one of these optional variables within the square bracket is null or does not exist, then this whole thing will not be shown to the user. So this is really exciting and cool.
You said this is really exciting and cool.
Now let's add over and out back to that.
You said this is really exciting and cool. Over and out.
There you can see that it added the comma, the space, and then echoed the confirmation that we used back at us. So you can see this have more power or more impact if you wrap this entire thing with the square brackets, because now what we're saying is that this entire portion will not be rendered if this variable does not exist. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we delete over and out. It's completely blank. Now if we put something, let's just move this square bracket over here. It will say you said, and then it won't say anything else.
You said.
But where we actually want the square brackets to make more sense would be right here, where it will echo your confirmation.
You said this is really exciting and cool. You said this is really exciting and cool. Over and out.
This is basically the basics of utilizing dialogue in Bixby. One more thing before we move on is I wanted to show you the title key instead of the value key. There will be a link to the documentation where these different options are. But here, let's pretend like there's a period at the end of this sentence.
You said this is really exciting and cool. Over and out.
Notice the period is here, and notice how this O is not capitalized. We can actually fix that with a title, which will capitalize the first letter of that variable.
You said this is really exciting and cool. Over and out.
Great, so now we have the basics of Dialog, and let's go ahead and comment that out. And now we're going to start using Dialog macros. The first thing we're going to do is right-click New Dialog, and I'm going to name this the template-macro-defs.dialog.bxb. We're going to delete this, and we're going to use the template macro def key instead. And we're going to name this macro def output in all caps. Here, we're going to pass in a couple parameters, and we're going to pass in output type output. It's going to be min optional, max 1. Let's copy and paste this to save some time. And it's going to be, we're going to pass in the confirmation as well. And now let's add a content with just a blank template for now. That way we get rid of that error. Okay, and actually let's just do, I'm in the macro now. Now let's go ahead and call this macro in the dialog file. And we do this with the following syntax. Template, and I believe it is macro. And now in single quotes, we put the name of our macro, and then we pass in the parameters. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are calling a macro, the output macro. We're passing in this output in the first slot, which here we define as the parameters, the first parameter as output. Then the second parameter, which is a confirmation, that's what it's expecting. We're passing in that confirmation from our Walkie Talkie action. So now if we run this, both these variables will be passed in, but the current template is I'm in the macro right now, or I'm in the macro now.
I'm in the macro now.
And that's how we know that this macro is being called properly. Notice how there's two dots. Let me just delete that dot right there. That was in the template in the output.dialog file. Now that we're able to call this macro, we're probably going to be mostly working on this macro. For now, let's hop over to this file, and we're going to be here for a while. So before we move on, let's actually add a couple more trainings, 3 more, for what if you only say the confirmation? And we're going to add a 1-word version, a 2-word version, Roger, confirmation, Roger, Walkie Talkie, and a 3-word version. This way, Bixby knows to look for the 3-word version and the 1-word version, so on and so forth. Now notice the difference here is that we don't have an input. So that's what makes these trainings different from the previous trainings. So now if we just say copy.
I couldn't find any output.
Right click here, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a no result dialog. So output no result. And just like that, no result. And we're going to match an output. And from output Walkie Talkie, which will be our action. And let's go into the output dialog, copy and paste this line. Basically, we're just going to call the same macro if there's no result. And here you should see that with this same path, if we just say copy.
I'm in the macro now.
we're still in the macro. And the reason why that it wasn't reaching the macro is because this dialog right here is for if there's an actual result for the output, right? This one here is for if there's no result for the output. So if the action that was supposed to return an output didn't return an output, then this dialog gets called. And here we can see in the JS that if input is null, it's just going to return null, and that's why no results came in, even though we have a confirmation. So if we look at the debugger, we can see here that our confirmation is copy, but nothing got outputted anyway. Going back to our template macro.defs.dialog file, now we have three situations to deal with. We have the situation where both the input, or in this case the output, and the confirmation are passed in. So let's go ahead and write our if clause for that. And this is the syntax. If exists, parentheses, confirmation, and exists output. So this is just basically saying, you know, if those two variables exist. Else, if the output exists, but not the confirmation. And finally, else, which is in this case, if if either just the confirmation exists or neither exists. Now, theoretically, this action should not be possible for neither to exist. So, you know, we're really just checking to see if the confirmation exists here. But anyway, you know, hopefully that isn't too confusing. But we're really dealing with these three cases. And in this case, this would be something like if the user said, hello, over. And then this would be if the user said hello. And this would be if the user said just over, so just the confirmation. And now you can see that it's screaming at us saying that it's empty. That's fine. Let's go ahead and put an empty template in each of them. And let's get to work. The first thing we want to do here is for it to have some kind of confirmation that it heard us loud and clear. And let's just say that for now it's going to just echo our output and then say copy that. So very similar to what we had earlier.
Here's what I found.
Okay, so it didn't take that as, see here that you can see that the suggested training, which is what it's doing, is that it's making this entire thing the input. So we're going to probably be visiting the training a lot because, you know, it's not fully trained yet, but we're going to want to train over as the confirmation over, hello world as the input instead of the entire thing being the input. So there we go. And now,
Hello world. Copy that.
okay, so now we have it saying that, but it's going to get pretty dry.
Hello world. Copy that.
If it always says the same thing. And one really useful trick here is to use choose random. And we want to put our different choices inside of this block. So let's copy and paste that. And let's make a different variation of this. So let's do, you said that, copy that, and let's do, I heard you say that, copy that. But now what if we want to actually change this dynamically? We can do that with another, you guessed it, template macro. And this one, we're going to call it the confirmation template macro. It's not going to take any parameters because it doesn't need to from here. We just want it to return either copy that, over and out, you know, whatever, right? We're going to define that list of different things that we want it to return. But actually before we move on, let's actually test this real quick.
Hello world. Copy that.
So here you can see that it did the first one.
Hello world. Copy that.
And again.
I heard you say hello world. Over and out.
Ooh, okay, so that was like the 8th time that it did the same one in the row.
I heard you say hello world. Hello world. You said hello world. Over.
There we go. So we finally got all 3, but there you can see that it's choosing randomly between these 3. Now let's go ahead and make it have more variation when it comes to what confirmation that it sends back to us as the user. What we can actually do here is make the confirmation template macro def, or macro, and it's going to choose randomly between these options. Roger that. Copy that. Over and out. Wilco. 10.4. And now, right here, we want to reference that macro. So just like before, single quotes, in the single quotes, the macro name, confirmation, and we're not passing anything in. Go ahead, copy paste that here and here. And for this one, let's actually make that a comma. Okay, so now let's try it.
I heard you say hello world. Over and out.
Now you can see that it randomly chose between one of these 3, and then it randomly chose between one of these. So let's go ahead and actually comment these out and then see what happens with 10.4.
You said hello world. 10-4.
Now, obviously we don't want it to say 10-4. And this is where a really cool key called the speech key comes in. Now, the template is what gets displayed right here, but the speech key is what gets read to the user. So we actually wanted to read 10.4 instead of, 10-4 or whatever. So yeah.
I heard you say hello world. 10-4.
And this is a very convenient way to basically make the speech sound different from, how it would read the dialogue normally. So okay, now that we fixed that issue, we can go ahead and uncomment out those. And now we actually have a different issue.
Hello world. 10-4. Hello world. Roger that.
Here we can see that the punctuation isn't accurate here. We should have a capital R there. And how can we fix that? We can fix that by adding a title. But where do we add the title here? We add it like this. Title, open parentheses, and then after this parentheses and in between the curly bracket, you can close that parentheses right there. Let's go ahead and do that for this one as well. And because this one is after a comma, we don't need to wrap that in a title thing. Let's go ahead and try it.
I heard you say hello world. Roger that. Hello world. Wilco.
There we go. And now it properly capitalized that for us. So great. Now we've done this section of the if-else clause. First, we want to add some quotes here, because this way it'll make it more clear that it's quoting us instead of, what Bixby is saying. So here, to add quotes, you can use the escape backslash and add a quote, escape backslash, add a quote, and you said escape backslash and a quote, escape backslash and a quote. Now we're basically wrapping this output with the quotes right here. Let's go ahead and do that for the third one as well. There. And let's try that out.
Hello world. Over and out. This is so cool. Copy that.
All right. And also, since this is the first letter of this one, we want it to be a title instead of the value. And okay, so that should be looking pretty good now. Let's go ahead and work on the second block, which is what Bixby will say to us if we have an output, but without a confirmation. So for now, let's just put testing, and we can do this by just saying hello.
Testing.
There we can see that is properly hitting this block, which is nice. The first one we're going to want it to do is you forgot to say, and then we're going to escape a couple quotes here. You forgot to say macro. And we're actually going to want a new macro because it doesn't make sense for you to say hello world, then roger that, right? You should be saying something like hello world over or hello world out, something like that, right? So we're actually going to want to create a new macro for this. So let's do no confirmation. And then we're going to want Bixby to say over at the end, because otherwise Bixby won't be following what it's preaching, and ain't nobody like a hypocrite. So there we go. And it's going to yell at us because there is no macro called no confirmation. Let's go ahead and copy paste this. Just add the no underscore. Let's get rid of roger that, copy that. We're going to want over. And we're going to want out. And let's get rid of those. Okay, cool. So now it should say, you forgot to say over. You know, a little redundant, but you know, that's fine.
You forgot to say out.
And let's also make this a title with the trick from earlier. Title parentheses, and then close the parentheses right there.
You forgot to say over and out. Over and out.
Cool. So now we also wanted to choose a bit random. Like normal speech, you know, you don't want it to be too monotonous over and over. So a degree of randomness is always nice. Okay, and now let's do did you forget to say, and let's just copy and paste this here, save some time. And let's just, yeah, did you forget to say, you know, whatever you said, or, you know, over and out. And let's copy paste this again. Don't forget to say blah. And actually, this period here should be a question mark because, wait, no, this first one should be a period. The second one should be a question mark because obviously this is a question. Did you forget to say? So now Bixby will say a few different things to us to remind us to say over.
Don't forget to say out. Did you forget to say over? You forgot to say over and out. Over and out.
And just as a bit of, you know, at best a slight chuckle, Bixby will say the same, you know, confirmation that it asked you to say. And you might notice that actually, that this behavior here, that's the way it's going, is because right here, it remembers what it selected for the first one, and that's why it repeats again. Finally, the last thing we need to address is how we handle if the user just says a confirmation, but no input.
I couldn't find any output.
So here we can see that nothing's there. Let's just put ASDF real quick.
Ask.
There we go. So we know that it's calling this template. So let's go ahead and choose random. And for the first one, you forgot to say what you wanted to say. Macro confirmation. Make sure to have the brackets and stuff in the right place. A cool thing here you might notice is that you can actually reuse these macros, which is very helpful. In this case, despite this being called the no confirmation, it makes sense to use over and out here instead of, you know, Bixby telling you something then saying roger that as if it understood it, because that's not what's going on here. So you forgot to say what you wanted to say, and then let's copy paste this and do all you said was, and let's reference the action that we or the confirmation here. So all you said was value confirmation, and then Bixby will say something like over. All you said wasy. All you said was. And let's do, don't forget to include your message, exclamation mark. And because we have the end of a sentence, let's make that a title. So, okay, confirmation might be empty. Fair enough. In this case, we know that this block will always be, reached with that. But in the case that it's not, to get rid of that warning, let's just, add the square brackets on it. And let's test it.
Don't forget to include your message. Out.
Okay, don't forget to include your message. And let's also add periods at the end of these because we have periods on the end of the others.
You forgot to say what you wanted to say. Over and out.
Bixby's being a little sassy there.
You forgot to say what you wanted to say. You forgot to say what you wanted to say. Over and out. You forgot to say what you wanted to say. Over and out.
And if you want to test one specific one,
all you said was over. Over.
You can comment
all
out
you said
the others.
was over. Over. All you said was over. Over and out.
Ooh, okay. That's all I was trying to do, was to get it to say something besides the confirmation that I sent it. So, okay, cool. This is behaving as expected. And perhaps the last thing we should do is, or one of the last things we should do for the dialog is to refactor it. And here we can see that, it's kind of cluttered and stuff in these if-else blocks. And likewise, if this capsule gets expanded, we could probably reuse these if-else clauses somewhere else, right? So let's go ahead and make template macro defs for each of these. Template macro def, forgot input, and we can see that we need to pass in the confirmation. So param confirmation, max 1, min required, and type as confirmation. And the content, we can just go from here, cut and paste, plop that right there. Now let's call that macro. So template macro. Okay, I'm gonna have to move my cat. I'm sorry, cat. Oh, there you go. So macro forgot input, and we pass in the confirmation from above. Save that. Let's make sure it's working.
Don't forget to include your message. Out.
Great. And now let's do the same thing for these others real quick.
Did you forget to say over? Over. I heard you say hello, Bixby.
Okay. I'll be adding comments to this capsule, as well as some metadata stuff and an icon, and I'll throw those up onto the GitHub repo. And the code will be at this GitHub link right here. Here are some useful resources for Dialog within Bixby. All these links will be in the description down below. Thank you very much. That wraps up this long video. Hopefully by the end of it, you will be a dialogue expert in Bixby and you'll be able to write some pretty engaging dialogues for your capsule. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to follow me at Twitter at John without the H. That's it. Yeah.